I have a belly hugger that I always have to touch and hug at night to get a good night's sleep. One day, I got up and went to the landlord's son's room by mistake. Climbed into bed and habitually lifted the pillows close as a back and forth rubbing. Suddenly, a hoarse voice came from the head, touch enough? To react. I came home from work and as soon as I walked in the door, I saw a big, tall, leggy, handsome guy sitting on the couch. I live alone. My first thought was that there was a burglar in the house, and it was not a good thing. So I took a few steps back to the door to find the landlord who lives next door. The thief sitting on the sofa is really handsome, long legs, broad shoulders, cold white skin. Never mind, I am a face control. I did not hold back, froze and stopped, and looked in a few more times. Soon realized that something is not right. How can a thief drink tea in someone else's house in such a calm and relaxed manner? His behavior, how to look like this is his home. But the landlady never told me that she was going to rent out the other empty rooms in the house. That handsome guy's cold-faced demeanor looked like a bad way to communicate. So I turned around, ready to go to the landlady first to ask for clarification. Just as I raised my foot to walk out, the handsome man's voice drifted far away, stop. I couldn't afford not to answer, so I turned around and asked him tentatively, who are you? Why are you in my house? At his words, the handsome man let out a low laugh, and his bony hand separated two fingers to pinch the teacup to his thin lips. After a light sip of tea, his hand propped back on the sofa, he looked at me with a good look, his voice teasing, are you sure this is your home? I don't know yet, I'm going out for a trip, my home becomes yours. I stood at a bit of a loss for words, clutching my bag. Was this his home? Just as I was wondering, the door next door opened and Mrs. Johnson, the landlord, came rushing over. Mrs. Johnson had a sugar cane in her mouth, and her gaze lingered on my face for a moment before meeting my confused and bewildered eyes. As if realizing something, she pulled me behind her to protect me, pointing the cane at Handsome and lecturing, did you say something mean to Amanda Green? What's so mean about being mean? You bought this house for so long and you don't live in it, there's no place for a little human girl to live, what's wrong with me renting it to her? The handsome man looked like he was angry and laughed. Originally he was still sitting on the sofa calmly. He stood up and said, Mom, this is my wedding house, you just rent it to someone else without asking me? My wedding room, letting someone else live in it? Do you think that's reasonable? Mrs. Johnson was silent for a moment, as if realizing that she was in the wrong. She stammered and retorted, well, it's not certain if you'll have anyone wanting this house, and it's also your wedding house. You've got a girlfriend, you've got a wedding house? Handsome man. He sat back on the sofa again, his legs stretched, a non-negotiable look said, then I do not care, this is my house, bought for me and my future wife to live. She lifted her chin and pointed at me, what's she doing living here as a stranger? Mrs. Johnson crossed her arms and replied, you're lucky. I could clearly feel the handsome man's gaze on me becoming more and more piercing. If hate could kill, I felt like I would have died 1688 times under his hand. Mrs. Johnson continued, our Amanda Green keeps your house clean, if it wasn't for her, Alexander Smith, would you be sitting here drinking tea as soon as you get back home? Don't you dare live here without a 3-day and 3-night cleaning? I'm sorry to hear that. Because I've never been the one to clean this house. Handsome sniffs, raises his right eyebrow gently, and gives a short grunt, retorting to Mrs. Johnson, I ask my aunt to come to my house every week to clean, she should know better. It dawned on me. So that's how it is, no wonder the cleaning aunts come to the house every week, to do the cleaning. I thought Mrs. Johnson was the one who called. If it wasn't for the cleaning lady saying that my wife seems to be hiding someone in the house and asked me to come back quickly to take a look, I wouldn't even know that my wife and her boyfriend are living in my house. With that, his gaze swept over me again with deep contempt. My face became hot for a moment. Because I immediately comprehended what he meant by hiding someone. It was the human-shaped belly pillow in my room. When I first moved to this house, the bed in the master bedroom was too big, and I often felt insecure sleeping alone in the cold. Then bought a 1 m 8 human-shaped abs pillow online. That pillow abs part of the feel extremely good, simply boyfriend flat replacement. I touched and hugged it every night, enjoyed it, and slept extremely soundly. It is estimated that the length and size of the doll, covered in the quilt like a humanoid, by the cleaning auntie who came to clean up the misunderstanding. I scratched my head, but I can't explain this oolong. After all, that shape of the doll, a bit thunderous. I really don't want other people to see it. The matter ended with Alexander Smith and I sharing a room in peace for the time being. Firstly, the rental contract between Mrs. Johnson and me had not yet expired. Secondly, Alexander Smith had just come back to China, so he didn't have time to look for a new place to live for a while. And he didn't want to live with his parents. So in the end, he had to choose between the second bedroom and the children's room in his wedding house. And the master bedroom has been turned into a doghouse by me. I felt embarrassed about this and said to him, "I'll give you back the master bedroom." Who knew that his handsome face, which was already not giving me a good look, stunk even more. I don't sleep in rooms where other people have slept. I closed my mouth resentfully, but still couldn't resist muttering, "But I've lived in this house for so long." Alexander Smith, however, had sharp ears and snorted coldly, "I will sell it after a while, and when I buy a new house, I will move out immediately." I was silent. I've been living in someone else's house, and forcing the owner to move out. It's a bit of a reversal of the Big Dipper. Alexander Smith lived in the house. At first, I was nervous about upsetting him if I wasn't careful. What if he kicked me out if he wasn't happy? But after a month of living together, I realized that he seemed to be very busy with his work, and even though I lived under the same roof, I seldom saw him. Because of this, I gradually let my guard down, always forgetting that there was another person in the house. I wouldn't take care to close the door when I went out of the room. This weekend, Alexander Smith was in. He came out of the second bedroom next door and passed by my room, swept by unobtrusively, and fixed his eyes on the human-sized belly pillow lying on all fours on the bed for a few seconds afterward. He froze for a moment, then smiled and asked, "What's that?" I was stunned for a split second. "Huh?" Alexander Smith lifted his chin at the abs pillow in my room and said, "Ugly and chic, it goes well with you." Me. I went back to my room and looked at the 8-pack abs on the doll and fell into deep thought. I also realized that it was inappropriate to let the doll's abs show outside every day. It's indecent and invites petty jealousy. I did not do anything, and bought a dress for the abs pillow. Every night, there is an extra step to lift up the clothes and touch the abs. Don't say, it's more immersive. After dressing the pillow, I went to take a shower, and when I was about to put on the body wash, I realized that the bottle was empty. Thinking that Alexander Smith wasn't home, I wrapped myself in a towel and went out to get a new one. Coincidentally, Alexander Smith had just returned from a workout. But I hadn't found my shower gel yet, and I was wandering around the living room like a fly on the wall. Alexander Smith coughed lightly, and his impatient tone came from behind me. "Can you get dressed properly? Is this your home alone?" Still rummaging for the body wash, I casually apologized to him. "I'm sorry, I forgot where I put the new body wash." Finally finding it in my locker, I take it and get up, turning around to see Alexander Smith standing behind me the whole time without moving. I raised my eyes and noticed that his ears and face were unusually red. A few drops of fine sweat slid down his cheeks, accompanying his somewhat heavy, rapid breathing, down the curve of his throat. No? Anaerobic on intensity now? Congested like that. I didn't have time to think about it, a little chilly, and hurriedly jogged into the bathroom with the shower gel. When I got out of the shower, I saw Mrs. Johnson arrive. She was carrying a casserole and said to Alexander Smith and me, "Freshly cooked beer duck. It's absolutely delicious. Come and eat." Mrs. Johnson's craftsmanship was beyond doubt, and whatever she cooked in the past, she would always bring me a portion to try. This time was no exception. I rushed over with my bowl. Alexander Smith frowned, a little disgusted. "Mom, I don't like duck meat." Mrs. Johnson smirked. "Who said it was made for you? You are also worthy of letting me cook it myself? Corey, come over here. Alexander Smith. Mrs. Johnson rubbed my head and asked me if it was good. With Mrs. Johnson's excellent cooking skills and gentle attack, I managed to eat all the beer duck in that pot. Delicious is delicious, just a little drunk. When I was still conscious, I saw Mrs. Johnson patting her head. "Oops, it's over. I forgot that you cannot drink, under the wine a little too much, your uncle's moutai to pour half a bottle of." Me. At night, did not even bother to touch the doll's abs, and fell asleep in a daze. I don't know how long it took, but I woke up with the urge to pee. Bracing my chaotic head, I got up from the bed and searched for the restroom by muscle memory. Headed back again from muscle memory. Enter the door, take off my shoes, climb into bed. Lift the covers over my body. I don't know if it's an illusion, but just after I pushed my body all the way under the covers, I smell a nice refreshing body wash on the covers. It didn't smell like mine. I didn't hold back and pressed my face against it, grunting and rubbing. How come I didn't think the comforter smelled so good before? After settling into a comfortable sleeping position under the covers, I scooted closer to the Abs doll, as usual. As soon as my body was close to the doll, I couldn't help but mutter in my heart, why has this doll gotten stronger? It's also a bit hot. No matter, the brain is dizzy, a little hallucination is normal. So I habitually lifted up the clothes of the Abs doll and put my hand on my abs. In the next second, the abs retracted back in an instant, like an evasive reaction to being startled. My hand paused for a moment, too lazy to open my eyes, and did not think much about it, as usual, began to touch randomly, back and forth, repeatedly touching. Inexplicably, I felt that my abs were extraordinarily nice to touch tonight, with a solid, soft feel. Although I have never touched the real thing, but this is no different from the real thing, With my eyes closed, I actually instantly had Alexander Smith's face in my head. I felt like I was touching his abs, and it didn't feel like I was touching his face at all. Needless to say, Alexander Smith's body looks awesome. Usually I get sleepy after a few strokes, but today I was actually getting more and more energized. I gulped in enjoyment as I still had a little aftertaste. Not restricting myself to one spot of abs, I began to widen my range, my hand traveling upward haphazardly. My hand stops at a raised spot. What part of the abs hugger is this? Why does it seem like I've never touched it before? Just as I was wondering, there was a light cough from above my head, followed by a voice so tense it was hoarse. Have you touched it enough? I seem to be reacting. This familiar voice came and gave me a jolt of fear. Was it Alexander Smith? Not daring to open my eyes, I hoped I was hallucinating. The hand still over him froze instantly, and hesitated to take it off. With a pop, Alexander Smith turned the night light on. I tilted my head and looked at him through the dim light. He was blushing, his handsome face wrinkled with a frown as he glared at me viciously. My face instantly heated up as well. I didn't dare to look at him more and lowered my head to apologize repeatedly. I'm sorry. Alexander Smith interrupted me. I'm sorry, why don't you take your hands off my chest? His words made me even more nervous, and I couldn't resist closing my fingers and squeezing them. I heard Alexander Smith give a muffled grunt. Then he gritted his teeth and said to me, Amanda Green, you get out now, and I'll pretend nothing happened. My mind went blank as I scrambled out of bed and slipped back into my room. Just as I walked back to the doorway of my room, there was the slamming of the bathroom door closing behind me. The sound of clattering water lasted for a long time. I went back to my own bed and lay down, the quiet gradually bringing my otherwise chaotic mind back to sanity. I just seemed to be going rogue on Alexander Smith. Although I hadn't coveted him much because of his modeling-like handsome face, I had only thought about it. In the dream, I didn't even dare to cross the line, but in real life, I was actually so watery to go up and down on him. Think of Alexander Smith's shocked expression. He must have never imagined that I am actually a wild pervert on the surface. Alas, I really know the face of a man, and the face of a beast, Chingbite Jean Ah. I opened my eyes and thought for a long time, but did not think of how to face him. Finally, when it was getting light, I took out my iPhone and clicked on the rent app. Ready to move out. But after looking around, I couldn't find a cheaper or better apartment than the one I'm in now. When I first met Mrs. Johnson, she liked me so much that she offered me a very low price, and that's why I signed a long-term contract. Looking at it this way, I can't leave for a while. And it was agonizing. I scratched my head and rolled under the covers, bumping into the Abs doll on my side. Looking at the bogey, annoyed. Get a hand on it, it doesn't feel as good as Alexander Smith, more annoyance. Why did I think of him again? I kicked my foot and kicked the doll right out of bed. I'm still agonizing over how to deal with Alexander Smith, and there's one project after another over here at work. I was so busy that I left work later and later every day, and I had no time to think much about it. Except that I realized that every day when I arrived home, I could see Alexander Smith sitting on the couch, sometimes reading a book, sometimes drinking tea. But as soon as I entered, he immediately got up and went to his room. He avoids me like the plague. This day after working overtime, I was so hungry that I had a craving for hot pot. So I went to Hadaleo by myself. As a result, there were a lot of people that day, and I lined up with a number plate. If I knew that I would be in line for 2 hours, there are still 10 tables. 2 hours ago, I would have left without looking back. But now, I've been in line for 2 hours, so if I leave now, won't I have wasted my time? Although I was very hungry, I gritted my teeth, chewed the potpourri, and continued to wait patiently. Finally, at 1:03 a.m., I was able to eat at Hai Di Lao, without the student discount. Just after ordering, my iPhone dinged and vibrated and a message popped up, which I tapped on. It was from Alexander Smith. "Why aren't you home yet?" Not a moment later, he sent another message. My mom asked me to ask. I thought for a moment and replied, "Auntie never goes to bed before 10, how does she know I'm not home?" That the other party is in the process of typing. On the chat box lasted for about 3 minutes. Only then did Alexander Smith send a message, "She's got insomnia." Me. He asked again, "So are you still coming home tonight?" He asked, "What's our relationship?" What relationship, I go home or not he also cared about. Perhaps see I have not replied for a long time, he sent, "No other meaning, is afraid that you die outside the influence of my house for sale." Oh, human face Alexander Smith. I explained to him, "I've just been waiting in line for hot pot, just got in line, and I'll probably go back late tonight. I'll move softly, very quietly, and try not to disturb you while you're resting. If I disturb you, you can scold me." Alexander Smith, "If you don't climb into my bed somehow, it's fine. And no one is allowed to stay here any later, I'm a clean freak." Me. In order to prove that I was really alone, I took a picture of a hot pot and sent it to him, with a bear doll at the opposite seat. Alexander Smith asked, "Just yourself and a bear doll, he's not accompanying you?" I was puzzled, who? With hindsight, I realized that he was talking about my abs pillow. Who's a good guy to bring that abstract abs pillow out to eat hot pot with? I replied to him, "He can only keep me company in bed, so it would be a bit thunderous to bring him out." Alexander Smith didn't reply again. When I returned home after eating and drinking, the light in the living room was still on. Alexander Smith was still sitting in the living room, the dim chandelier shining on his expressionless face. I don't know if it was an illusion, but I could see a hint of sadness in his downcast eyes. The house was warm enough, I took off my jacket as I walked inside, and the lint of the lapel rubbed against my neck, and a dense itch swept over me again. When I tried on the product necklace today, I was mildly allergic, and the area of my neck that touched the necklace itched like crazy. I couldn't stop scratching, and my neck was red. Alexander Smith's eyes lingered on my neck for a moment as he walked past me back to my room, still not saying a word, except that his expression was particularly hard to read today. Like he'd seen something that upset him. I felt low inside for no reason. He hates me that much. I was a bit moved earlier, but now my heart can't be moved anymore. He doesn't like me, we can't piss in the same pot. The next night, I was in the kitchen cooking pasta when my mom suddenly video called me. It gave me a fright and I rushed back to scan the area. Luckily, Alexander Smith wasn't around. The noodles were just half cooked and I couldn't walk away, so I simply turned down the volume and picked up the phone in the kitchen. As a result, when I picked up the phone, my mom's loud voice couldn't even be suppressed by the low volume. "Amanda Green, it's almost New Year's Eve, do you have a boyfriend this year?" I closed my eyes somewhat helplessly. I knew it was that line. I also followed the original line with a flourish, "No boyfriend, look at me, I'm such a loser. Do I look like I'm seeing someone? I've never even held a man's hand, Mom." My mom pulls up the volume again, "Why didn't you look for it?" I held my forehead, "Is that something I can find if I want to?" "But you live alone, Mom and Dad are not assured." "Hey! Who's behind you?" Following my mom's words, I turned around. Alexander Smith appeared at some point, walked behind me, and opened the refrigerator to get a can of Coke. When he saw me looking at him, he held up the Coke and touched it vaguely to me. Speaking in a low voice, but clearly audible, "I'm getting something, no interruptions, right?" After saying that, he left me alone and walked out the door. Me. My mom's eyes are sharp, saw the whole thing. Alexander Smith did not go far, immediately questioned me, "That boy behind you is a boyfriend, right?" He also said that he lives alone. He and you wear pajamas or couple color. Young man born handsome nah. Mom likes it very much, so bring it home this New Year's Eve, do you hear me? I hurriedly explained, hey, Mom, he is not. Before I could finish my sentence, the video phone suddenly hung up. At a closer look, it was because of a network failure. The Wi-Fi was down. I poked my head out of the kitchen to see. Alexander Smith held the unplugged router and smiled at me apologetically. The internet was slow playing the game. I was checking it out. I forgot you were on the phone. I'm sorry. Me. Later, no matter whether you send a small essay or send voice, my mother did not listen to her daughter's words, and she was determined to recognize Alexander Smith as her son-in-law. I am helpless, but also have no choice, only the heart vaguely borne a kind of ominous premonition. I always feel that my mom will hide me to pull the big one. In order to avoid unnecessary emotional disputes, I had to first confirm that Alexander Smith indeed did not have a girlfriend. Wanting to ask in person, but thinking about Alexander Smith's attitude towards me, I backed off. Finding a free time, I carried fruits to Mrs. Johnson. Auntie was sunbathing and she was overjoyed to see me come. She had a lot to say, so I listened to her gossip about the whole neighborhood before I found a chance to make an aside. Downstairs, Xiao Wang has a second child, so I think your son will have one soon, too. Mention Alexander Smith. Mrs. Johnson originally raised the smile stuttered, held up the old glasses, sighing, he has been back for 2 months, his side in addition to you I have not seen other girls, this second child in the next life, right? I pretended to be surprised, he doesn't have a girlfriend yet? Silly girl, if he had a girlfriend, would he still live with you? Of course he's going to live with the one he likes. I nodded, slightly relieved. Even if my mom did something outrageous, it would be easier to deal with. But still, I begged my mom not to mess up. I came out of Mrs. Johnson's house and found the door open. As I approached, the voices of Alexander Smith and the housekeeper came from inside. Housekeeping, Mr. Xia, you can finally come back. Your wife always behind your back to find someone. That comforter is always a man sleeping. How is it? Did you catch him? That kind of woman should not be. You are so good, you deserve better. Alexander Smith laughed softly. Auntie, under the covers is a big doll she likes. She's not like that. You don't speculate about her like that. The housekeeper continued, you should keep an eye out. You are always away from home, not now, who knows later. Your wife is not a peaceful person at first glance. Alexander Smith's tone suddenly became serious. I know my wife better than you do, and I'll spend more time with her in the future. Besides, I don't need you to clean my house in the future. I don't want to hear any bad rumors about her in the future either, or else you don't need this job either. I chewed his words over and over again. Suddenly, I felt that his attitude towards me wasn't that bad. At least, he was willing to defend my reputation. Alexander Smith said a few more nasty things, and the janitor left in a cloud of gray. I peeked out from behind the door and came face to face with Alexander Smith, who watched my expression steadily, knowing I'd listened the whole time. He was about to open his mouth to say something when I stepped in first. Trouble for you. Alexander Smith didn't have the heart to say, if you know you're giving me trouble, drop your ugly doll first and show me your sincerity. I refused without thinking. No way. I can't sleep without it. It saved your life, didn't it? I replied honestly, it's the best feeling one I've ever bought. What would I cuddle at night if I lost it? Alexander Smith narrowed his eyes, and the corner of his mouth quirked up. Oh yeah? So my hand doesn't compare to it? I muttered in a small voice, it can be touched all at once, you can't. At that, Alexander Smith suddenly took a step closer to me, no more than 2 fists between us. I could clearly see myself in his eyes. So what if I said, my girlfriend can just touch it? I scratched my head, not thinking, so what's it got to do with me? Alexander Smith paused, the corners of his mouth twitching as he gave me a light tap on the head, gritting his teeth as he spoke. You spend the rest of your life with your ugly doll. No? What's the point of moving when there's something to talk about? He turned around and went back to his room. In my hand, I don't know when there was an additional anti-allergy ointment. A week later, my ominous premonition was confirmed. My mom came to see me. A mother is like a daughter. After my mom decided that Alexander Smith was her son-in-law, she couldn't wait a minute. She couldn't even wait for something to bring back to show her on New Year's Eve. She and my dad booked a ticket to come and see him straight away. I was busy all day at work without looking at my smart iPhone, and as soon as I got off work, I saw a video from my mom of them talking to Alexander Smith's parents. I felt like the sky was falling. I hoofed it back and realized Alexander Smith hadn't come back yet, my hand on the door silently retracted. Wanted to send a message to Alexander Smith and ask to see what to do. The next second, Alexander Smith stood in front of me while asking, "You're here as a doormat, do not go in." He put his thumb on the combination lock and was about to open the door. I rushed to stop him. I explained to him the situation inside the house and waited for his judgment. But out of my surprise, Alexander Smith did not get angry, nor the slightest dissatisfaction, and even looked also in a good mood look. Oddly enough, that subby awkward monster. I raised my eyes to look at him, only to see him holding his forehead, turning his back, his shoulders shaking. I don't know whether he is crying or laughing. Never mind, apologize first. I'm sorry, I didn't know my mom was here or that they were actually meeting. If I knew I would have stopped it. I've caused you trouble again. I'll go in now and explain. I was just about to open the door. This time it was Alexander Smith who stopped me. He took out his iPhone and pulled up the surveillance of the house and put it between us. Mrs. Johnson's voice leisurely came, "I can too like truly this child, coquettish very much, dreaming that she is my daughter-in-law. This bride price must listen to me, 88,088,000. My mom pushed back, "We're kindred spirits, and Xiaoxia is a very good kid. The dowry is too much, just give her the normal amount, and we'll have a dowry." Mrs. Johnson interrupted, "No. How can we let Chuli know that we like her with only $168,000? My standard is the normal standard, 888,888, not a penny less. No more arguments, it's settled." The corner of my mouth twitched. How did it all get to this point? I looked up at Alexander Smith, who had a smile at the corner of his mouth. I asked, "Why are you showing me the surveillance? The situation is getting out of control. Is watching the surveillance going to solve the problem? Look, you don't want to spoil the elders' fun when they're so happy, do you?" I was silent. My mom would be really upset if she found out that it was all really fake, right? And if it's Alexander Smith, I'm actually begging for it. Alexander Smith squared his face and asked me again, "How much do you think is the right amount for the dowry? Why do you still ask such a boring question at this time?" I didn't want to make a fuss with him, and casually said, "It's already $888,000, why don't we round it up to a whole number? $1 million would be good." Alexander Smith nodded in response, "Yeah, okay. What's so good about him?" After that, he pushed open the door and took my hand to meet his parents. I stood beside him, stirring the hem of my shirt, a strange emotion welling up inside me. Inexplicably, I began to envision how wonderful it would be if all this were true. After dinner and sending off the four parents, whose eyes were all smiles, Alexander Smith went to the balcony to make a phone call. The neighborhood went from bustling to silent. It was like a piece of my heart was missing, and I was torn up inside. So I sent a message to my best friend about my troubles, and finally asked her, "Do you think I should confess? I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get a good deal on this, but I'm sure I'm going to be able to get a good deal on this. Sister, you have quit drugs, so tolerant." Well, I haven't quit drugs. So I thought about it, what's the big deal? Anyway, the worst that can happen is that he rejects it, and then I move out. I lay back against the couch and contemplated how I was going to confess my feelings to Alexander Smith. I fell asleep thinking about it. Maybe I was too sleepy, but it wasn't long before I started dreaming. In my dream, Alexander Smith picked me up in his arms. My face was pressed against his firm chest, and at that moment, I somehow became conscious in the dream. It was a dream anyway. It wasn't too much of a stretch to do something excessive, was it? Alexander Smith, he doesn't know about anyway. Coddling in real life, I punched hard in the unreal dream world. I reached around Alexander Smith's neck and kissed him. It was my first kiss, and all I could do was nibble, and as it turned out, he seemed to be doing the same. It was an unskilled, but passionate kiss. The dream image flickered and I was lying on the bed. Alexander Smith wasn't there, and I was still in the habit of going in search of the Abs doll on the bed, lifting my shirt and rubbing it repeatedly before settling down to sleep. I just don't know why this Abs doll feels better and better the more I touch it. It seems like. And Alexander Smith feel the same. And as if this abs doll was going to become a sperm, it would move around and I got impatient and just got up and pinned it down. Sure enough, in the dream didn't want to let him go at all. The next day when I opened my eyes and woke up, I saw that it wasn't the abs doll sleeping next to me, but Alexander Smith. I closed my eyes again on fire. Not daring to open my eyes, hoping it was my hallucination. But not a second later, I opened my eyes again. He wasn't wearing any clothes. I didn't really want to see it, so I turned a blind eye. Alexander Smith was white and muscular, a red scratch on his chest was especially noticeable. I thought to myself, oh no, I think I scratched him. Followed upward, I saw his lips red and zingy, looked very good to kiss. No, this seems to be kissed like this. I instantly thought of last night's dream. That scene, that one action. Right on. It wasn't a dream. It was me actually dominating him. Alexander Smith wasn't awake yet, so I took a deep breath to calm my pounding heart. I catapulted out of bed and sat up. At first glance, I saw my abs pillow lying in the trash. A 1.8 long doll crammed into a ball stuffed in the cramped garbage can, obviously cannot be stuffed into it, but still hard to stuff into the inside, can see the person who did it to it how much he hated it. And the person who did it is, unsurprisingly. I looked at the man beside me, who was also a handsome sleeping mess. Silence. There's something to be said for bullying people's dolls into not being able to talk, isn't there? Alexander Smith woke up while I was working on how to pull my abs doll out of the trash can. It was so tight that I couldn't get it out even with my tug-of-war efforts. Alexander Smith stood over me at some point and said in an urn, "It's not enough to feel me up, you want that shit too, right?" I jerked the doll and played dumb. What did I do to you last night? Forget it, I can't piss in the same pot as you. Me. Alexander Smith, don't let go of my hand gripping the abs doll, then takes hold. Clearing his throat, he said, I like you. All the bad things you've done to me, in my case, are all top-notch good things. Amanda Green, don't ever touch this stupid doll again, can't you come and touch it for real? He held my hand close to his abs, and I was a little short-circuited by his sudden confession. My eyes darted around and ended up on the abs doll that was stuck in the trash can. Disconcerted, Alexander Smith gently pats my cheek and asks through clenched teeth, I'm just going to say this, do you choose me or do you choose it? No? Why are you still jealous of a doll? I'm just trying to figure out how to rip it out. Otherwise, the trash can will be scrapped too. I'm looking at the garbage can with all the abs in it, and then I'm looking at Alexander Smith. Who wants a fake one when there's a real one? I stopped pretending and went straight to the man in front of me, who was going to be so aggravated he was going to cry if I didn't give an answer. When I got engaged, I was shocked when I looked at the extra $1,888,000 on my bank card. I took the balance and asked Alexander Smith, what's this extra $1 million? Alexander Smith wasn't surprised and just calmly said, I gave it to him. Not $888,800. That's a lot. That's what Mom and Dad gave you. This is what I gave you. This is too much. It's not too much. No amount is too much if it's for you. As he said that, he dropped a tender kiss on my forehead. Alexander Smith is a man who is not easy to communicate with on the surface, but in fact, he is a good bully behind his back. For example, he wants to move to the master bedroom and sleep with me. He respected my opinion and wouldn't move back without my consent. I think it's funny, I won't let him do it several times, standing in front of the bedroom door, teasing him, why do I remember a man said that he would never sleep in the bedroom I slept in his whole life? I think his last name was Shea? Do you know Alexander Smith? I've teased Alexander Smith a few times, and he's become quite immune. This time, he got the hang of it. Hugging his pillow, his eyes flicked away, who's so clueless? Anyway, it's not me, I was born to warm the bed for my wife. Said, he lowered his head and the iPhone scratch a few times, my iPhone rings a crisp and pleasant notification. Wife, let me in, I'm applying to be your doll tonight. I looked down to check my iPhone in between, he gave me a peck on the corner of my mouth and said, good girl, don't play with the smart iPhone. Come play with me. End of text.